Next, The Faithful Trial, audio MP3, number 41. Now, back to my friend from the Lord, whom God has blessed to be an inward Jew. Not long ago, Tim was confronted with a fiery trial, seeming to come from nowhere to test his faithful obedience to the ways of God. On his way to inspect one of his accounts, inspired to take the freeway, just ahead of him, past the freeway on-ramp, was an accident. Although tow trucks were on the scene, damaged cars remain in the lanes of fast oncoming cars. Approaching the accident, he quickly slammed on the brakes, trying to swerve out of harm's way. Unfortunately, the lady involved in the accident was outside her vehicle, standing in a freeway lane where oncoming express traffic drives. She was sandwiched between her own car and one of the tow trucks, which had just arrived on the scene. Later, the tow truck driver explained to me he had just instructed her to move from the back of her vehicle around to the front and get out of danger from the oncoming traffic. Instead of moving completely off the freeway lanes, she stopped between her vehicle and his tow truck. Sadly, this is the time my friend Tim Spurgeon was desperately trying to avoid hitting her car, which was stopped dead on the freeway. Tragically, it was too late. The unthinkable took place. There was a collision careening her car straight into her as she stood between her own car and the tow truck. This, as you can imagine, was a horrific scene. My friend frantically jumped from his car and rushed over to help the lady, only to confirm his worst fears. Not only was she severely hit by her own car, but her injuries were unimaginable. She was literally cut in half. Her legs hung from her body, attached only by her skin and clothing. The tow truck driver explained. They literally had to pick up her legs, then her body separately. Unfortunately, it gets worse. Her entire torso was smashed horizontally into the tow truck grid. She was stuffed inside the tow truck radiator. The tow truck driver said to me, at that time, she was still alive. Her whole body was smashed. Her face and her head were blown up like a big water balloon. Yet, he said, I could still see in her eyes that she was alive. Her eyes were moving, but just barely, more like a fixed stare, a stare of utter and complete shock, a stare of disbelief. She remained silent. Not a single sound was heard. Her eyes said it all. Tim told me when he first rushed to help her, and after viewing her mutilated condition, he simply collapsed to his knees, dropping down on the freeway pavement. He held up his hands in the air, crying out prayers to God to intervene and save the woman. I personally had several opportunities to talk to the police officers who responded to the scene. They told me how totally distraught my friend was over what had just taken place. The police officer commented how terribly torn up he was. He was simply beside himself, overwhelmed with grief. The officer, who was moved by Tim's extremely sad and remorseful actions, told me, looking me straight in the eye, "You take care of him. He's very, very special. He's a good guy, a special guy. You take care of him. He's going to be all right." I was alerted by this accident by Tim's wife. I had just recently arrived in the country from Europe, and only by the great miracle-working hand of God was I home in the first place when Tim's wife called. I've been desperately trying to leave the house, but I simply could not get my act together. Something just would not let me leave. I became frustrated, sat down on the couch, and at that time, the phone rang. It was Rachel, Tim's wife. God's magnificent grace was in action. She said to me, very calmly, very collectedly, "Chuck, Tim has been in an accident, and he needs you to come down now." That's right. The accident happened to be 5 minutes from where I lived. Upon arriving at the scene, I ran up to where Tim was. He was standing across from me on the freeway with his back to me. That instant, he turned around, looked straight at me, and burst into tears. His cry was very loud and bitter. It literally took me by surprise. Tim has been my friend for over 20 years, and in all those 20 years, I had never heard an outburst cry like that from him ever. Later, when he talked to me, Tim said he was overwhelmed when he saw me. It looked like a dream, like a vision. He couldn't believe I was there. He said it looked like I wasn't standing on the ground. It seemed like I was floating by slowly. As the accident scene was being cleared, the police took one final opportunity to console Tim. They didn't arrest him. They didn't harass him. They didn't ask him any more questions. They knew from the scene and from previous accidents that this was just that, a horrible, terrible accident. But my friend didn't take it that way. He took it very hard. He was extremely traumatized and terribly disturbed. When he got to his house, he hurried to his room to get on his knees to pray, asking and beseeching God for guidance, direction, and forgiveness. However, the evil one was there too. The accuser of the brethren was in his mind, tormenting him with guilt from past sins. Tim was being plagued with harassing thoughts and demented scenarios, blaming him for this accident. A barrage of torturing thoughts flooded Tim with overwhelming feelings of guilt and fault because of his past sins. Guilt-laden emotions besieged him along with ungodly spirits telling him this was why God allowed this accident to occur. As I pulled up outside his house, he came outside confessing this absolutely asinine nonsense about how God had punished him because of some supposed delusional sins falsely, deceitfully fed to him by the evil one. Moved by the Holy One of Heaven, I firmly and strongly rebuked him for entertaining such foolish nonsense. I looked him straight in the eye and reminded him he has the Spirit of God burning within him. Stop letting the evil one take your mind over, flooding you with false, deceitful guilt, which has no rhyme or reason to it. The things Tim was saying literally didn't make any sense. It was clearly not of God. It was a pack of deceitful lies, a world of confusion from the evil one, which he is the author of. I remember the man of God, Dr. Hay, saying, "It is possible for evil spirits to possess even the minds of believers, those who have the Spirit of God." Evil spirits don't attach themselves to the Spirit of God or the Spirit in man. They replace your mind. They replace your thought processes, controlling your mind and bodily functions by replacing your own will. They are in control of what you do and what you say, how you act, and how you react. We must all guard our minds and never let it become so weak where evil spirits can simply walk in and take over our bodies, especially when our hearts and minds are made vulnerable by a traumatic event and are shocked and overwhelmed with grief. Thankfully, prayerfully, the Almighty has turned this traumatic event into a magnificent blessing. Stirring up the Spirit of God within Tim was the godly fruit produced, which may have been lying a little dormant too long. The Almighty gave him a wake-up call to get his spiritual house in order. Since then, to this very day, he is on fire, fervently studying God's Word with regular righteous fasting and striving to do what is right and good and pleasing in God's sight. Remaining faithful, growing in the grace and knowledge of your Creator is the ultimate action which must be carried out with godly success before the tribulation age of 42 comes upon us all. Verse 24, the Lord bless you and keep you. Verse 25, the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Verse 26, the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Numbers chapter 6, verse 24 to 26, New International Version.